Sarah Chen stood barely 5 feet tall in the massive hallway of the Galactic Defense Academy. The corridor stretched high above her, designed for beings twice her size. Her small backpack looked like a child's toy against the towering walls lined with weapons from 1,000 different worlds. She checked her schedule tablet again. Combat Theory, Room 847. The numbers on the doors were written in 12 different alien scripts. But thankfully, the universal translator in her ear made sense of them all. As she walked, other students moved past her like living mountains. The Krathen walked on 4 massive legs, their turtle-like shells scraping the ceiling. The Vorthax slithered by on dozens of tentacles, leaving trails of luminescent slime. Even the smallest aliens stood head and shoulders above her. Sarah had gotten used to being stared at. Humans were still new to the Galactic Alliance, and most aliens had never seen one before. Some looked curious, others dismissive. A few seemed almost afraid, though Sarah couldn't understand why. She was probably the least threatening thing in the entire academy. What she hadn't gotten used to was her shadow. It followed her everywhere, staying exactly 30 feet behind at all times. The other students gave it a wide berth, some crossing to the other side of the hallway entirely. Sarah had tried talking to it once, turning around and asking its name. It had simply stared at her with those massive silver eyes and said nothing. She'd learned not to try anymore. The creature was unlike anything in the Academy's databases. It stood 9 feet tall, on 2 digitigrade legs that ended in claws capable of cutting through battleship armor. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color depending on its mood, currently a deep blue-black. 4 arms hung at its sides, each ending in hands with fingers longer than Sarah's forearms. Its head was elongated, almost dragon-like, with a mouth full of teeth that could bite through steel. According to every expert who had examined it, the creature was what the galaxy called a void stalker. They were mentioned in hushed whispers across 100 worlds. Apex predators that hunted in the dark spaces between stars. Planet killers, the stuff of nightmares. And one had appointed itself as Sarah's personal bodyguard. She reached room 847 and paused at the entrance. Through the doorway, she could see other students already seated at desks that dwarfed her. The instructor, a towering insectoid hive lord, chittered something about tactical formations to creatures that could level city blocks with their bare hands. Sarah took a deep breath and walked in. Conversation stopped. Every eye in the room followed her to the only empty seat, specially modified to accommodate her smaller stature. She sat down and pulled out her tablet, pretending not to notice the stares. Professor Clix9 resumed his lecture about flanking maneuvers, but Sarah could feel the tension in the room. It wasn't her they were nervous about. Through the classroom's large windows, a dark shape could be seen standing in the courtyard below, waiting. Always waiting. Miss Chen, Professor Clix9's voice buzzed through the universal translator. Perhaps you could enlighten us about human military tactics. Sarah looked up from her notes. The professor's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been malice. She'd dealt with instructors who thought humans didn't belong at the academy before. Human tactics tend to focus on adaptability and improvisation, Professor, she replied evenly. We prefer to change our strategies based on the specific situation, rather than following rigid doctrines. A student in the back, something that looked like a cross between a bear and a lobster, let out a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. Improvisation? You mean making things up because you're too primitive to plan properly? More laughter echoed through the room. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. Sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. It makes you unpredictable. Unpredictable or incompetent, the same student pressed. Sarah was about to respond when the room suddenly went silent. Through the windows, they could all see the dark shape in the courtyard turning toward the building. Even at this distance, even through reinforced glass, the weight of those silver eyes could be felt. Professor Clix9's mandibles clicked nervously. That's enough questions for today. Miss Chen, perhaps you could share some specific examples of human adaptability in our next session. The rest of the class passed in uncomfortable quiet. When the session ended, Sarah packed her things slowly, letting the other students file out first. She'd learned it was easier that way. less chance of accidentally bumping into someone and causing an incident. As she walked toward the door, she heard whispered conversations in a dozen languages. The universal translator caught fragments. Why does it protect her? What did the humans do? My uncle fought in the Terran contact war. He said they're more dangerous than they look. Sarah pretended not to hear and made her way to the cafeteria. The dining hall was enormous, designed to accommodate the dietary needs of hundreds of different species. Food synthesizers lined the walls, programmed with nutritional profiles for every member race of the Alliance. She found the human station and ordered something that approximated pizza. The synthesizer hummed for a moment before producing a steaming slice that smelled almost right. She took her tray and looked for a place to sit. The cafeteria was packed with students, but tables emptied as she approached. Groups of friends suddenly remembered urgent assignments elsewhere. Study groups discovered they needed to be in the library immediately. Within minutes, Sarah sat alone at a table for 20. She ate in silence, reading her textbook about multi-species combat coordination. The theories were fascinating, but she wondered if she'd ever get to put them into practice. Most of the other students wouldn't even talk to her, let alone fight alongside her. A shadow fell across her table. Sarah looked up to see a group of senior students standing nearby. Their leader was a Vorthak named Slesh, whose tentacles writhed with barely contained aggression. Behind him stood a Krathen and 2 Hive Lords, all members of the Academy's most elite combat unit, human. Slesh's voice bubbled through the translator with obvious disdain. "We need to talk." Sarah closed her book and looked up at them calmly. "What about?" "About your pet," one of the Hive Lords clicked. "It's making everyone nervous." "It's not my pet," Sarah replied. "I didn't ask for it to follow me around." "But it does follow you," Slesh said, leaning closer. His tentacles left wet marks on the table, and we want to know why. "What makes you so special that a void stalker treats you like precious cargo?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I've wondered the same thing myself." The Krathen stepped forward, his massive shell scraping the ceiling. "We think you do know. We think the humans sent you here for a reason. Maybe as a spy. Maybe as some kind of weapon." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm just a student. Same as you." "No," Slesh hissed, his tentacles now inches from her face. "You're not the same as us. You're weak, fragile. Your species barely discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago. You have no business being in an academy designed for the galaxy's elite warriors." "The Alliance Council disagreed," Sarah said quietly. "The Alliance Council made a mistake," the Krathen rumbled. "One that we intend to correct." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the temperature in the cafeteria seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died mid-sentence. The sound of hundreds of different species breathing was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. Through the massive windows that looked out onto the academy grounds, a dark shape could be seen moving. Not the usual patient stalking, but something faster, more purposeful. Slesh followed Sarah's gaze and his tentacles paled. "It can't possibly hear us from out there." "It doesn't need to hear you," Sarah said, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "It can see you threatening me." "That's enough." The group of seniors exchanged nervous glances. The Void Stalker was now standing directly outside the cafeteria windows, its silver eyes fixed on their table. Even through the reinforced transparent aluminum, its presence felt overwhelming. "This isn't over, human," Slesh whispered, but he and his friends were already backing away. They left quickly, along with most of the other students in the cafeteria. Within minutes, Sarah was alone again, except for a few brave souls who pretended to be very interested in their food. She looked out the window at her mysterious guardian. It stood perfectly still, a statue carved from nightmare and shadow. But Sarah had begun to notice things about it that others missed. The way its scales shifted to softer colors when she was calm, how it positioned itself to block cold winds when she walked across the courtyards, the careful distance it maintained, close enough to protect but far enough to avoid making her uncomfortable. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, it wasn't malicious, at least not toward her. Sarah finished her meal and headed to her next class, Advanced Weapons Theory. As she walked, she found herself thinking about what Slesh had said. What did make her special? She was smaller and weaker than every other student at the academy. Her species was new to the galactic community, barely out of their home system compared to civilizations that had been exploring space for millennia. So why did a creature that could single-handedly destroy entire fleets treat her like something precious? The weapons lab was her favorite part of the academy. Unlike the classrooms designed for giants, the lab equipment could be adjusted for different species. Here, her small size was actually an advantage. She could work with precision tools that larger beings found clumsy to handle. Today's lesson focused on energy weapon calibration. Sarah partnered with Keth, a crystalline being who communicated through harmonic frequencies. He was one of the few students who didn't seem bothered by her presence, mostly because his species found most carbon-based life forms equally incomprehensible. As they worked on adjusting a plasma rifle's targeting matrix, Keth's musical voice hummed through the translator. "Your shadow friend has many of my people concerned." "Concerned how?" Sarah asked, making a delicate adjustment to the weapon's focusing crystal. "My world is ancient. We have legends about the Dark Hunters, creatures that stalked between the stars when the galaxy was young. They say these beings served as guardians for something precious, something that was lost long ago." "Drowned?" Sarah paused in her work. "Guardians for what?" "The stories are unclear. Some say they protected the first intelligent species. Others claim they guarded knowledge too dangerous for most minds to comprehend. But all the legends agree on one thing. When the Dark Hunters choose to protect something, it means that thing is more important than entire civilizations." A chill ran through Sarah's veins. "Those are just stories, right?" Keth's harmonic laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Perhaps, but my people are very old, and we remember much. Tell me, small human, what do you know about your species' first contact with the galaxy?" Sarah thought back to her history classes. "The Galactic Alliance found us about 50 years ago. We were still confined to our solar system, just starting to build colonies on Mars and the outer planets. The Alliance offered us membership and shared their technology." "Yes, that is the official record," Keth hummed thoughtfully. "But my people remember it differently. We remember the Alliance being surprised by humanity. Surprised and concerned. Why? Because humans appeared in our databases long before your species achieved spaceflight. Ancient records spoke of a people called the Inheritors, beings who would one day claim a destiny among the stars. The descriptions matched your species perfectly." Sarah almost dropped the plasma rifle. "That's impossible. Humans evolved on Earth. We have fossil records going back millions of years." "I do not doubt that," Keth replied. "But evolution takes many forms across the galaxy. Perhaps your development was guided." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, an alarm began blaring throughout the academy. The sound was unlike anything she'd heard before. A deep thrumming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Red lights flashed in complex patterns that her universal translator identified as emergency codes. Through the lab's windows, Sarah could see chaos erupting across the academy grounds. Students were running in all directions, while instructors barked orders in a dozen different languages. In the sky above, dark shapes descended through the clouds. Ships, but not like any she'd seen in Alliance databases. The vessels were organic-looking, their hulls pulsing with veins of sickly light. As they landed in the academy's courtyards, creatures began pouring out. They moved on too many legs, their bodies shifting and flowing like living liquid. Where they touched the ground, the very stone began to wither and decay. The blight, Keth's harmony took on a note of pure terror. "The Devourers have found us." Sarah had read about the blight in her xenobiology classes. They were an ancient enemy of the Alliance, creatures that consumed not just matter but the very essence of life itself. Entire star systems had been rendered lifeless by their touch. The Alliance had been fighting them for thousands of years with limited success, and now they were here, at the academy. The lab's emergency lockdown engaged, sealing the doors and windows with energy barriers. But Sarah could see through the transparent walls as the blight creatures spread across the grounds like a cancerous infection. Students and instructors fell wherever the creatures touched them, their bodies crumbling to ash in seconds. Then she saw something that made her heart stop. Her guardian was fighting them. The Void Stalker moved like liquid death, its four arms becoming blurs as it tore through the blight creatures. Its scales had shifted to deep crimson, and its claws left trails of silver fire in the air. But there were too many of them. For every creature it destroyed, 3 more took its place. And they were all moving toward the weapons lab. Moving toward her. "They know," Keth whispered, his harmonic voice barely audible over the alarms. "Somehow, they know what you are." Sarah turned to stare at him. "What I am? I'm just a student." "No," Keth replied, his crystalline body refracting the emergency lights into rainbow patterns. "You are much more than that. And I think your guardian is about to show us exactly what that means." Through the window, the Void Stalker had stopped fighting. It stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos, its silver eyes fixed on the lab, on Sarah, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the academy, she heard it speak. Its voice was like the sound of stars dying, transmitted directly into her mind without need for translation. And what it said changed everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the galaxy. "Inheritor," it called to her across the battlefield. "The time has come." The word echoed in Sarah's mind, like thunder. Inheritor. It carried weight beyond its simple meaning, as if the universe itself had spoken her true name for the first time. Around her, the weapons lab descended into chaos. Keth's crystalline form vibrated with harmonics of fear, while other students pressed themselves against the walls, as far from the windows as possible. The energy barriers flickered under the assault of blight creatures, their acidic touch eating away at the protective fields. But Sarah found herself walking toward the window, toward the battle raging outside. "Sarah, no!" Keth's melody cracked with panic. "The barriers are the only thing keeping us alive." She pressed her hand against the transparent aluminum, watching her guardian tear through waves of enemies. The Void Stalker fought with impossible grace, its 4 arms moving in patterns that seemed choreographed by physics itself. But Sarah could see the truth the others missed. It wasn't winning. It was buying time. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly, her breath fogging the window. "Known what?" Keth's harmony wavered. "Don't lie to me. Your people remember things. You said so yourself. How long have you known what I am?" A long pause filled only by the sounds of battle and alarms. Finally, Keth's voice came soft and sad. "Since the day you arrived. Your genetic pattern matches records my ancestors kept hidden for 50,000 years. Records of the first makers." Sarah turned from the window to stare at him. "First makers? The species that seeded intelligence throughout the galaxy. They walked among the stars when most worlds were still cooling magma. Every thinking being, every civilization, carries traces of their influence in our genetic codes. All except one. Humans." Sarah whispered. "Humans are not influenced by the first makers," Keth confirmed. "Humans are the first makers. You are what they became after eons of evolution, scattered and sleeping until the galaxy was ready for your return." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. We're just humans. We barely made it off our own planet." "Your bodies are mortal," Keth explained, his harmonic voice gentle now. "But your minds carry the memories of 1,000,000 worlds. Your spirits hold the keys to technologies that shaped reality itself. You are the inheritors of the greatest civilization the galaxy has ever known." Outside, the Void Stalker roared, a sound that shattered windows across the academy. More blight creatures were emerging from their ships. These ones larger and more terrible than the first wave. They moved with purpose now, no longer randomly destroying but converging on the weapons lab. "They know too," Sarah realized. "The Blight knows what I am." "The Blight are the enemies your ancestors fought in the ancient war," Keth said. "They have been waiting for the inheritors to awaken, to reveal themselves. That is why they attack now. Why they risk everything to reach you. To kill me, to consume you, to take into themselves the knowledge and power that sleeps in your genetic code. If they succeed, they will become unstoppable. Sarah looked back at the battle. Her guardian was bleeding now, silver ichor streaming from dozens of wounds. It had been fighting for less than 10 minutes, but it moved like a warrior who had been battling for hours. The blight creatures seemed endless, pouring from their ships in streams of living corruption. "How many others are there?" she asked. "How many inheritors?" "We do not know. Your people were scattered across the galaxy after the ancient war, their memories locked away until the time of awakening. But if the old records speak truth, there cannot be many, perhaps dozens, perhaps less, dozens, against an enemy that had consumed entire star systems." Sarah felt despair creeping into her heart, until she remembered something Professor Clix-9 had said in combat theory class. Sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. She turned to Keth. "Can you access the Academy's defense systems from here?" "The main controls are in the command center," Keth replied. "But there are emergency overrides throughout the facility." "Why?" "I'm into G, because I'm tired of hiding behind barriers while someone else fights for me." Before Keth could protest, Sarah moved to one of the lab's weapon synthesis stations. Her fingers flew over the controls with a fluency that surprised her, as if she'd operated such machines 1,000 times before. The synthesizer hummed to life, its molecular assemblers crafting something that had never existed in its memory banks. The weapon that emerged looked simple. A rod barely 2 feet long, made from materials the synthesizer labeled as unknown alloy. But when Sarah grasped it, the rod began to glow with soft blue light, and she felt power coursing through her like electricity. "Impossible," Keth breathed. "That is a neural resonator. They have been lost for millennia. How did you know how to build one?" "I didn't," Sarah admitted, staring at the weapon in her hands. "I just knew what I needed." The emergency barriers flickered again. Through the window, Sarah could see that the blight had reached the building. Their touch was already eating through the outer walls, leaving, spreading stains of decay. Her guardian stood directly beneath the window now, making its last stand. Sarah made her decision. "Override the lab's lockdown," she told Keth. "Sarah, that is suicide. The moment those barriers fall, I find out what I really am." She moved to the emergency control panel and pressed her hand against the identification scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then alarms began blaring with even greater urgency as the Academy's central computer registered something it had never seen before. "Warning," the synthetic voice announced in a dozen languages. "Maker-class genetic signature detected. Override protocols engaged. All security restrictions lifted." The barriers around the lab dissolved instantly. The blight creatures that had been pressing against them stumbled forward, caught off guard by the sudden absence of resistance. But they recovered quickly, surging toward the lab's entrance with renewed hunger. They never made it inside. Sarah stepped out of the lab and into the corridor, the neural resonator humming in her grip. The first blight creature to reach her simply stopped. Its form, which had been shifting and flowing like liquid corruption, froze mid-motion. Around it, other creatures began to slow, their movements becoming sluggish as if they were wading through thick syrup. "What?" one of the creatures managed to rasp before its voice cut off entirely. Sarah raised the neural resonator, and blue light filled the corridor. Where the light touched the blight creatures, they began to change. The corruption that defined them burned away like mist before sunlight, revealing what lay beneath. They had been living beings once. Proud warrior species from across the galaxy, consumed and twisted by the blight's influence. Now they remembered who they had been. The creatures staggered backward, looking at their hands with confusion and horror. One, a being that might once have been Vorthak, spoke in a voice thick with emotion. I remember. My name was Thesh. I had children. What have I done?" You were not yourself," Sarah said gently, though she had no idea where the words came from. "You were taken against your will. But you can choose now. You can be free." The light from the neural resonator spread outward, flowing through the academy like water. Wherever it touched, blight creatures stopped their assault and began to remember their true selves. The organic ships in the courtyards shuddered and went still as their crews awakened from their nightmare. But not all of them accepted the gift of memory. Through the main entrance, Sarah could hear something roaring, something that had been lost to the blight so long that it had forgotten it was ever anything else. The sound grew louder as massive footsteps shook the building. Sarah's guardian appeared at her side, its silver eyes wide with something that might have been pride. When it spoke, its voice was clearer than before, as if the neural resonator had awakened something in it as well. "The Ancient One comes," it said. "The first taken by the blight, when the galaxy was young. It has been their commander for 1,000,000 years, and it will not give up its power willingly." The entrance to the academy exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris came something that hurt to look at directly. It stood 20 feet tall, its form a constantly shifting mass of shadow and corruption. Where it stepped, the very ground cracked and withered. This was not a converted being like the others. This was blight in its purest form. "Inheritor," it spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "You offer them freedom, but freedom is pain. I offered them purpose. I gave them strength beyond their petty mortal limits. You gave them slavery," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I gave them evolution," the Ancient One countered. "As I will give to you. Join with us willingly, and your power will spread across the galaxy. Resist, and I will take it by force." Sarah looked around at the corridor full of freed beings, at her guardian standing ready to die for her, at Keth peering nervously from the lab doorway, all of them depending on her to make the right choice. She thought about what her professors had taught her about combat theory, about adaptation and improvisation, about how sometimes the best plan was to have no plan at all. Then she thought about what it really meant to be human. "You made one mistake," she told the Ancient One, raising the neural resonator higher. "You assumed I was the weapon." The blue light pulsed brighter, and suddenly, Sarah could feel them. All across the galaxy, other inheritors were awakening. Dozens of them. Just as Keth had said, human minds that had been sleeping for 50,000 years were opening like flowers in the dawn, and they were all connected through the neural network that had once linked the first makers. Sarah felt the touch of minds that spanned star systems. Engineers who could reshape matter with a thought. Healers who could cure plagues with their presence. Warriors who fought not with weapons but with will itself. They had been waiting, all of them. Waiting for someone to light the signal fire that would call them home. "I'm not the weapon," Sarah said again, and now her voice carried harmonics that made the building's walls vibrate. "I'm the key, and I just unlocked the door." The Ancient One launched itself forward, its mass of corruption reaching out to consume her. But Sarah's guardian moved to intercept, and this time it was not alone. Through the academy's shattered windows came shapes of silver and shadow. Dozens of void stalkers answering an ancient call to battle. They had been waiting too. Waiting for their charges to awaken. Waiting for the war to begin again. The corridor erupted into chaos as the Ancient One fought against the pack of guardians. But Sarah barely noticed the battle. She was too busy listening to voices from across the galaxy, to inheritors who were stepping out of hiding after millennia of sleep. On distant worlds, humans were remembering who they really were, and the galaxy would never be the same. But as the neural resonator grew brighter in her hands, Sarah realized something that chilled her blood. The awakening was not just affecting the inheritors. It was affecting every human in the galaxy. Every descendant of the first makers was beginning to remember their heritage, including the ones who had chosen to forget for good reason, including the ones who had turned their backs on the light. Somewhere in the depths of space, in ships hidden beyond the galactic rim, other voices were answering the call. Voices that spoke of power without responsibility, of dominion without mercy. The ancient war had divided the first makers into two factions, and both sides had inheritors sleeping among the stars. Sarah had awakened them all. The battle in the corridor reached its crescendo as her guardian delivered a killing blow to the Ancient One. The creature of pure blight dissolved into nothingness. Its corruption finally purged from the galaxy. Around them, the freed beings began helping each other, tending wounds and sharing memories of their true selves. But Sarah stood frozen, the neural resonator trembling in her hands as she felt the dark minds stirring in the void. She had saved the Academy. She had freed the Blight's victims. She had awakened the defenders of the galaxy. But she had also awakened something else. Something that would make the Blight look like a minor threat. The real war was just beginning. The silence after the Ancient One's destruction felt heavier than the battle itself. Sarah stood in the ruined corridor, the neural resonator still glowing in her hands, while around her the freed beings tended to each other with the careful movements of those remembering how to be alive. Her guardian approached slowly, its silver eyes now holding a depth that hadn't been there before. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons. "You feel them," it said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Sarah nodded, her connection to the neural network still active. Across the galaxy, she could sense the awakening, inheritors like stars coming alive in the darkness. But among the lights of hope, darker presences stirred, minds that had once chosen a different path. "Tell me about the split," she said quietly. "Tell me what really happened to the first makers." The Guardian's scales shifted to deep purple, the color of old pain. "Your people reached the pinnacle of existence 50,000 years ago. They had conquered death, reshaped matter at will, and spread consciousness to every corner of the galaxy. But power without purpose is poison, even to gods." Through the Academy's broken windows, Sarah could see Alliance ships arriving, drawn by the distress signals. The cavalry, finally showing up after the battle was won, just like humans always seemed to do, arriving when they weren't expected and changing everything. "Some of your ancestors believed that intelligence should be nurtured and protected," the Guardian continued. "They saw themselves as gardeners, cultivating wisdom throughout the stars. But others grew tired of restraint. They believed that power gave them the right to rule, that lesser beings existed only to serve their will." Keth emerged from the weapons lab, his crystalline form chiming softly as he approached. "The Dominators," he whispered. "We have legends about them too. They called themselves the rightful heirs of existence." "The war that followed nearly destroyed the galaxy," the Guardian said. "Entire star systems were snuffed out like candles. Reality itself was torn and reshaped as weapons beyond imagination clashed across space and time. In the end, both sides realized they had gone too far." Sarah felt a chill run through her as understanding dawned. So they hid. Both sides scattered themselves across the galaxy and went into hibernation. The Protectors seeded their essence into primitive species like yours, creating what you call evolutionary pressure but was actually genetic programming. They would awaken when the galaxy was threatened, when their guardianship was needed again. And the Dominators? They chose a different path. They preserved themselves in pure form, waiting in hidden places beyond the galactic rim. They would return when the galaxy was ripe for conquest, when civilizations had grown strong enough to be worth ruling. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. By awakening the Protector inheritors, she had also awakened their ancient enemies. The neural network that connected all descendants of the first makers worked both ways. "How long do we have?" she asked. The Guardian's scales flickered between colors, a sign of deep thought. "The Dominators will need time to fully awaken their sleeping agents and recall their hidden fleets. Days, perhaps weeks, but they will come. And when they do, this battle will seem like a minor skirmish." Around them, the freed Blight victims were helping to clear debris from the corridor. These beings who had been enslaved by corruption were now working together. Their different species united by shared trauma and newfound freedom. It was a powerful symbol, and Sarah found hope in it. "Then we need to be ready," she said, surprising herself with her determination. "How many Protector inheritors are awakening?" She said, "When the Sea King..." She said, "Across the galaxy, I sense perhaps 40 minds stirring to full consciousness. Each one is unique, carrying different aspects of your ancestors' knowledge: engineers, healers, warriors, diplomats. You are the awakener, the one who lit the signal fire. But they each have their own gifts. Through her connection to the neural network, Sarah could feel them more clearly now. An engineer on a mining station in the Outer Rim was suddenly understanding technology that wouldn't be invented for centuries. A doctor on New Geneva was discovering she could cure diseases with touch alone. A farmer on Earth's newest colony was learning to make barren soil bloom with impossible abundance. They were all confused, all frightened by their sudden awakening. But they were also all connected to her. I can guide them, Sarah realized. Through the network, I can help them understand what's happening. More than that, the Guardian said. You can coordinate them. The protectors were always strongest when they worked together, when they combined their individual gifts into something greater than the sum of its parts. Sarah closed her eyes and reached out through the neural network. Her consciousness touched the awakening minds across the galaxy, offering comfort and explanation to those who were afraid, encouragement to those who were struggling to accept their new reality. She felt a response immediately. Not words, but emotions. Gratitude, determination, and above all, a sense of coming home that she recognized because she felt it too. When she opened her eyes, Alliance officers were entering the academy. Admiral Vex, the station commander, led a group of security personnel through the debris. The four-armed Altarian's expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes as he took in the scene. Miss Chen, Admiral Vex's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I think we need to have a conversation. Before Sarah could reply, her guardian moved to stand between them. The Alliance officers instantly raised their weapons, though Sarah doubted the energy rifles would do much good against a Void Stalker. Stand down, Admiral Vex ordered his troops, though his own hand stayed near his sidearm. Miss Chen, call off your companion. We're here to help. He's not mine to call off, Sarah replied. And he only responds to threats against me. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm trying to understand what happened here. Our sensors detected energy readings that shouldn't be possible. And now half the Blight fleet has somehow been converted back to their original species. Sarah looked around at the freed beings, who were watching the exchange with interest. Some of them had fought for the Alliance before their conversion. They would have families to return to, lives to rebuild. They remembered who they were, she said simply. People don't just remember their way out of Blight corruption, Admiral Vex replied. The process is supposed to be irreversible. Complete cellular restructuring, total mental domination, yet somehow, you undid decades of biological alteration in a matter of minutes. I had help, Sarah said, gesturing to the neural resonator still glowing in her hands. Admiral Vex's eyes fixed on the device, and Sarah could see recognition flickering across his features. Where did you get that? Those haven't been seen for thousands of years. I made it. That's impossible. The construction techniques were lost when... The Admiral's words trailed off as understanding dawned. His hand moved slowly away from his weapon. By the void. The legends are true. What legends? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Ancient records speak of the first makers, beings of incredible power who shaped the early galaxy. Most scholars dismissed them as mythology, but some of us believed we watched for signs, for evidence that they might return. Admiral Vex's voice dropped to a whisper. You're one of them, aren't you? An inheritor. Before Sarah could answer, alarms began blaring again. Not the Academy's emergency system this time, but something deeper. The planetary defense network was activating, its sensors detecting something approaching from the edge of the star system. Admiral Vex's personal communicator crackled to life. Admiral, you need to see this. Ships are dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Unknown configuration, but they're massive. At least 50 vessels, and more arriving every minute. Through her connection to the neural network, Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The dark presences she had sensed earlier were no longer distant. They were here. The Dominators, she whispered. What? Admiral Vex demanded. The other half of the First Makers, the ones who chose power over protection. Sarah's grip tightened on the neural resonator. I woke up both sides when I activated the network. The Admiral's face went pale. How long until they reach us? Sarah reached out through space, with her awakened senses, feeling for the approaching fleet. What she found made her stomach turn. The ships weren't just traveling through hyperspace. They were warping reality around themselves, moving in ways that violated the known laws of physics. Hours, she said. Maybe less. Admiral Vex was already speaking into his communicator, calling for fleet mobilization and planetary evacuation procedures. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough. The Alliance military, impressive as it was, had been built to fight conventional enemies. The Dominators had weapons that could reshape matter at the subatomic level. There is another way, her guardian said quietly. Sarah turned to look at the massive creature. What do you mean? The Protectors left more than genetic programming in your species. They left contingencies, tools and knowledge hidden in places where only awakened inheritors could find them. What kind of tools? The kind that ended the last war between light and shadow. Through the neural network, Sarah felt the other awakening inheritors responding to her urgency. Across the galaxy, 40 minds were turning their attention to the approaching threat. She could feel their varied talents beginning to align, their individual powers preparing to combine into something greater. But she could also feel something else. Fear. These newly awakened beings were just beginning to understand their heritage. They weren't ready for war against enemies who had been planning their return for 50,000 years. I need to reach them, Sarah said. The other inheritors. I need to help them prepare. The neural network will allow communication, her guardian replied. But true coordination requires physical proximity. The Protectors worked best when they were together, their minds linked not just by technology, but by presence itself. Then I need to gather them, Sarah realized. Bring them here before the Dominators arrive. Admiral Vex overheard the conversation and stepped forward. Miss Chen, I don't pretend to understand everything that's happening here, but I know a war fleet when I see one. If these Dominators are as powerful as you claim, then we need to evacuate the system, not gather more targets. Running won't help, Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority. If the Dominators reclaim their full power, nowhere in the galaxy will be safe. This is where we make our stand. She closed her eyes and reached out through the neural network with all her strength. To the engineer in the outer rim, come to the academy. Bring whatever you're building. To the healer on New Geneva, your patients will need you more here than there. To the farmer, making dead soil bloom, we need to plant the seeds of a new age. One by one, she felt their acceptance. 40 inheritors across the galaxy abandoning their old lives to answer a call they didn't fully understand. Some would travel in stolen ships. Others would book passage on merchant vessels. A few would simply appear through methods that physics couldn't explain. They would come because they had to, because somewhere in their awakening genetic memory, they remembered what failure meant for the galaxy. How will we know if it's enough? Sarah asked her guardian. The Void Stalker's scales shifted to gold, the color of hope. Because we are not the same beings who fought the last war. The Protectors learned from their mistakes, just as the Dominators learned from theirs. This time, we fight not just with power, but with the wisdom of 50,000 years. Through the Academy's windows, Sarah could see Alliance ships taking positions around the planet. They would fight, she knew. Even against impossible odds. It was what thinking beings did when faced with extinction. They stood together and refused to surrender. Just like humans had always done, since the days when they huddled around fires and told stories about heroes who stood against the dark. The thought brought a smile to Sarah's lips. Maybe that was what made humans special after all. Not their power or their ancient heritage, but their stubborn refusal to give up. Their willingness to improvise, to adapt, to change the rules when the game seemed unwinnable. The Dominators had spent 50,000 years preparing for this moment, but they had never learned to be human, and that might just be enough to make all the difference. As the first inheritor ships began appearing in the system, racing toward the academy with desperate speed. Sarah felt the neural resonator pulse with new energy. The network was strengthening, fed by proximity and shared purpose. The galaxy's greatest war was about to begin again. But this time, the children of Earth would stand at its heart. This time, humanity would show the universe what it really meant to inherit the stars.